Dobro. History. Archive.
All right, let's set the scene. It's November 23rd, 1984. We're at the Korean Demilitarized Zone. You know, literally the most heavily armed border on the planet. It's been the symbol of a frozen conflict for decades. But on this particular day, all hell is about to break loose.
Imagine hearing that, shouted in perfect English by a young guy running for his life. He's not just crossing some line in the sand. He's sprinting across the Military Demarcation Line. That's the tripwire for a war that technically never even ended. And his desperate plea is about to kick off a battle that pushes the entire peninsula right to the edge.
And the thing that just gets me is how fast this all went down. I mean, 1 second, you've got this totally routine, kind of boring tourist photo op. 30 seconds later, it's a full-blown combat zone with live rounds flying. In the time it takes to draw a breath, everything changed.
So you have to be asking, how did things go so sideways, so incredibly fast? Well, it all started with one man's decision to run, a single spark that was about to light a very, very short fuse.
You've got to understand the place where this all happened. The Joint Security Area, the JSA. It's such a paradox. It's supposed to be for diplomacy, but you have soldiers staring each other down 24/7. And there aren't any fences, no walls, just a low concrete curb. It's more of a psychological line than a physical one. And that was the gap one man was about to bet his life on.
This brings up two huge questions, right? Who on earth was this guy, willing to risk absolutely everything? And what kind of world was he so desperate to leave behind?
Well, the man in the middle of this firestorm wasn't a soldier. He wasn't some hardened spy. He was Vasily Matuzok, a student from Moscow's top diplomatic school. This guy was supposed to be the future of the Soviet system, part of the absolute elite, which of course makes his decision to run even more unbelievable.
And make no mistake, this was not some spur-of-the-moment decision. Matuzok was smart, he was fluent in English, and he was working at the Soviet embassy right in Pyongyang. He had been secretly planning this escape for 2 whole years, all because he wanted to get away from what he called the oppression of communism. He was a true believer in a different way of life, and he was ready to die to get it.
And here's where the timing gets just wild. On a global scale, 1984 was peak Cold War tension. Reagan had just given his evil empire speech, and everyone's on edge about nukes. But, and this is the crazy part, right there on the Korean peninsula, things are actually thawing out. The North and South had just held their first economic talks, literally a week before this happened. Matuzok's sprint was about to shatter that tiny bit of peace.
So, the second Matuzok's feet hit the southern side of that line, the whole place just exploded. Let's break down the tactical nightmare that unfolded.
The North Korean reaction was instant, and it was a massive, massive violation of the armistice. We're talking somewhere between 20 and 30 of their soldiers, the KPA, didn't just fire across the line. They poured over it, pistols out, chasing Matuzok into UNC territory. This wasn't some border skirmish anymore. This was an invasion.
And who was standing in their way? Just 2 guys, an American, Private First Class Michael Burgoyne, and a South Korean, Corporal Jang Myung-ki. They were massively outnumbered, armed with just their pistols, and they did the unthinkable. They stood their ground and fired back. Their bravery was just incredible. They slowed the North Koreans down just enough for Matuzok to find some cover. But that kind of heroism, it came with a terrible, terrible price.
As the firefight erupted, the KPA soldiers did what anyone would do. They dove for cover. And the closest cover was this feature called the sunken garden. Now, it sounds peaceful, right? But from a military point of view, it's a death trap. Think of it like a bowl. It's easy to jump into, but it is nearly impossible to fight your way out of when the enemy is on the high ground all around you.
So, in their frantic rush to get Matuzok, the KPA soldiers made a fatal mistake. They ran right into that kill box. They basically trapped themselves deep inside enemy territory.
And this is where the UNC training kicks in. The response was fast and it was textbook. The quick reaction force showed up within minutes, bringing M16s and grenade launchers. The commander, Captain Mizusawa, didn't hesitate. He ordered a classic envelopment, sending his guys around both sides of the sunken garden, cutting off any chance of escape. With a better position and way more firepower, they just rained fire down into that trap. The threat was neutralized, decisively.
So, the shooting stops after just 40 minutes. But the consequences? They were just getting started. It was time to tally up the real human cost of Vasily Matuzok's dash to freedom.
And when you look at the final numbers, they tell a very clear story. The UNC forces had 2 casualties, 1 killed, 1 wounded. The North Koreans, caught in their own trap, they were hammered. At least 3 killed and 5 wounded, all on the southern side of the border. It was a total disaster for their illegal incursion.
And we need to talk about that single UNC soldier who was killed, Corporal Jang Myung-ki of the South Korean Army. His stand in those first few seconds was absolutely critical. He gave his life to blunt that initial North Korean charge, saving the defector and his American comrade. For his incredible valor, he was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star.
And you want to hear the ultimate irony? The North Koreans, the guys who started the whole firefight by charging across the border, they were the ones who had to get on the line and desperately beg for a ceasefire. Their soldiers were trapped, and they needed permission from the UNC just to go get their dead and wounded.
Of course, the diplomatic fallout was instant. North Korea did what North Korea does and claimed the UNC had kidnapped a Soviet tourist. For the Soviets, it was a huge black eye, a major propaganda disaster, and the UNC, having clearly won the fight, made the smart call. They granted the ceasefire to stop this 40-minute war from turning into something much, much bigger.
All right, so let's pull back from the minute-by-minute action for a second and look at the big picture. Because this short, incredibly violent firefight wasn't just some random event. It was like the entire Cold War got shrunk down and played out in real time on this tiny piece of land.
So what did we really learn? Well, for one, it proved that the truce was hanging on by a thread. It also proved that the joint U.S. and South Korean forces were incredibly well trained and ready to fight. It exposed the desperation of the North Korean soldiers. They were clearly more afraid of their own bosses than they were of enemy bullets. And maybe most important of all, it showed how the actions of just one person could come dangerously close to restarting a major war.
And what about the man who kicked the whole thing off? Vasily Matuzok. He made it. He got asylum in the United States. But he didn't just fade away. He put that elite Soviet education to work, giving Western intelligence invaluable insight and actually helping to take down the very system he risked everything to escape from.
And that really leaves us with a pretty chilling thought, doesn't it? The world of 1984 feels like a long time ago, but the tensions on that peninsula, they're still there. If one man's desperate sprint for freedom could cause that much chaos back then, it really makes you wonder, just how fragile is that line between peace and war right now?